making this World Touring Car Series, where we ended up racing everybody with the same car sort of thing from Australia, South Africa, Britain and Europe, at Monza, and the next year at Donington. And that was the idea. A bit of a shattering experience because obviously we took our own car there. So we had at that point maybe 7 or 8 month old car, that had taken part in the South African series. On a plane and flew it there. And we rented some cars and we arrived there, and it was just like fucking, but everybody's got a story like that from South Africa, the amount of tires. I think we used 35 tires that weekend. We had 36, obviously. We had Dunlop tires, and Paul Radisich won on Michelin's, and I think they used more than 160 tires. So for the weekend. So look, if you want to beat the Europeans, you've kind of got to be in their show, like yes. The Van Linders are now. You can't go there as a, and I think we were behind on the development of the car as well in terms of shock absorbers, because we got Penske shocks the year after that, and they were 1.5 seconds faster at Kyle Army, just the shocks from the shocks we had, So I probably wasn't, I was probably too optimistic to think we would do well, but 36 or something on the grid, I couldn't see the lights through all the bonnets and things, so I had to wait till they all pulled away, and it was it was a very wonderful experience, but at the same time it was horrible because it did so badly in my mind, So it was insane. It was just world champions and top people, Soper, Winkelhock, Chicotto, it was just and in the Nissan's, Scaife was there. It was just a roll call of names. Nicola Larini was there. It was just a roll call of names, on the track with them. The height of my day actually was in pouring rain on Monza. I was actually quite quick. I was like in the top 10 on the wets. So it's funny because we always thought the BMs were slow in the rain, but actually they weren't. In pouring rain, in the drying, in semi-dry condition, they weren't great. And then the front-wheel drive cars and that were better. So it was a good experience. So Monza is set in a park, and it's got tremendous history. So you start off the straight, and then you've got the Curva Grande, but that's got a chicane in it now. But the Curva Grande, you can see where it went. And as you're driving around there, you can actually see the buses outside the wall. So if you had to drive the Curva Grande flat like they used to, then you could probably crash right through, into the suburb sort of next door. So we reached, in the touring car, we reached the top speed 3 times of the car. 260 or 270 3 times. Nice. So that track without the chicanes and that would be very, very, very fast. And it's a wonderful circuit, wonderful, and the Italian people were wonderful. Everything about it was really great. There was an era in motorsport that cannot be repeated. Let's call it the 70s or whatever, and the 80s. That we were just, the touring cars was the end of that somehow. We were still plugged into people like Sorrel. I mean, I saw Sorrel, I met Sorrel when I was 18 or so. I went with my dad to a rally, and there he was. And in the army in 1982 and 83, he was already a household name. From the sport, and I was very lucky to be a part of that, and and bump up with these people and whatever. And Owen, sure, I mean, and Tony Viana, the type of people they were, the things they did. For instance, Owen told me at Toyota they had I think it was a liftback rally car, and they were trying to make more power, so they fitted a 500cc motocross motorbike engine in the boot, driving a supercharger, and the navigator was entrusted with the throttle of this thing. So the driver had a throttle for the engine, and the navigator had the throttle for the supercharger. And obviously that didn't work out so well, because sometimes he was still accelerating the supercharger and that. But obviously, like with today's electronics, that might have actually worked, except that Owen didn't get it all together in terms of maybe giving the driver both throttles. Anyway, it doesn't matter. And yeah, like the stuff they did was just, outrageous. You wouldn't do it today. All the kind of things that they did, the sort of. I mean, I can tell you Tony Bihana stories as well. Where that guy was just.
What was he like? What was Tony like as a person?
Let's say driven. Look, he died when he was he 42 or 45? I thought he was so old. When I met Tony, he was living in Welkom, or actually in Woordenhofsrus. He had a very big workshop, and the race cars were prepared in a chaotic environment. So they always worked late. There was always something going to happen, and only starting to happen hours before everything had to be packed up in about 5 V8 vans and taken wherever. And I remember when I had to test Tony's cars, for instance. I don't. In the beginning, when I met Tony, he never wore gloves. Nobody wore gloves. Rallies were driven in shorts and that kind of thing. So Tony had a helmet. Tony had a helmet, and I was like, I painted my helmet and I looked after my helmet, went in a bag, and I wore a balaclava and underwear and everything, because I was well aware of the fire risk. Peter Goff was a big friend of my dad, and he got badly burnt. So, I was careful. And also, I liked that part of it. But Tony had a helmet that lived in the toolbox, and he would put it on like this, and the strap would just sort of hang here, and his seatbelts never got adjusted. So when I drove his car, I couldn't adjust anything because everything was sort of sweated in one place. And the helmet also, that strap was just like that, and it lived in the toolbox because he didn't worry about stuff like that. So he would just jump in the car and it was all much more like I don't know, rough and ready sort of,
Yes.
And Tony didn't speak or think about anything other than his cars. And I told you, Owen actually got so before 88, 87, 88, Tony had built a whole lot of BMWs, a lowrider, being very famous in 745 and whatever, and they were all Class A modified cars. Those days, modifieds were cars with the engines from the manufacturer. They were cars, and it was A, B, C, and D classes. And then for some reason, BMW decided they wanted a Class B car, and they got Owen actually to build it. And that car was quite sophisticated, and I think Owen's car was a bit revolutionary. But getting back to it, Tony was very upset about this Class B, and also that Owen got this contract to build these two cars. So he didn't really focus on the Class B car, and shifted completely to focusing on the Group N car, where we were running with the cadets, with the super bosses, and they'd been beaten up to then by Briggs, and he said over a period of the next 2 years, he just transformed that car just through hard work. It just like, so when we were racing touring cars, the engineers would be at the track, and let's say we were third on the grid or fifth or something, they would be like, okay, we've done everything we can, we've put the cars in the covers and let's go home. It wasn't Tony wasn't like that. So if he was slow, he would just stay there, and he would work through the night, and then he would be, where first light, he would be there at the clock of the course, can I practice? And he'd somehow make his car go from maybe not that fast to being on the front, and then win the race and that, So he was an incredible worker and driven. And so, but similarly to Willie Hepburn and Henny van der Linde and probably Ben, those, and Johan could see it, those kind of people, that they were racing, that they were building cars to race that they wanted to race. So there wasn't any idea in their head that they would build a car for Michael Briggs to race. So now, obviously, when you may be a very good racing driver, but you're in your late 30s, so you're slowing down and you're up against youngsters that are very quick. Plus, they're only driving. They've got engineers that are doing the other things for them. So Tony did drive touring cars, and I actually think extremely well, given the change that he had to make, and that he couldn't work on the car anymore and do all those things. And then he got sick. And his last, he missed his last Group N races. I drove his Group N car. Look, it was fast, because he'd spent so much time making his car. But anyway, and then the very last race of Tony's life, we were in East London. He had a colostomy bag sitting here on his hip, and I mean, the oak was fucked. So he couldn't tighten seatbelts, so he pretended to put seatbelts on. And so he raced with like out seatbelts and that. And in East
Sure.
London, we had the last race, and Michael Briggs and I were like eyeing each other, So you start making your strategy about the guy that you want to beat, because Tony, I saw him. I remember seeing him before the last race. He was in the combi there that we had there, and he was crying from pain. But he took some tablets, and there was Michael had gotten these cut slicks. So we had wets or slicks, and then there were these sort of half tires, and it was wet. So Michael got these, and I went along, and we borrowed them from Nissen, I think, and we had them on the car as well. And I remember Tony telling me, "No, those are the right tires. Those, you must put those on." And he went on slicks, and these tires overheated halfway through the race because it dried. And Tony won his very last touring car race, and I wasn't even cross about it, because with his brain power and his mental strength came in there and blew, beat Michael. I mean, I don't remember what exactly happened to Michael. I remember his spin, but it doesn't matter. It was race. And I remember Tony won that race on that drying track, and he came past us and that, and that guy, no. And I also remember one West Bank race, because in the West Bank car was quicker than him.
Okay.
And I won the championship with that in 1992. And I remember one race passing him. Like, I passed him like he was standing still, And the next thing, the fucking guy was back. And he's following me again, And then he overtook me on the last lap. I remember I was so angry. I couldn't eat the next day. I was so cross about it, Because he kind of had this mental ability to just dig deep and follow and just, no, he was an amazing competitor. Obviously I mentioned Henny and Ben and so on.
Yes.
Do you remember the last, I don't know if you know this, but the very last era of West Bank, they had Henny had that turbocharged Nissan, whatever, Ben had a rotary, and Willie had a car, and Tony had the low rider, whatever. I was already racing for BMW, and I was standing on top of the pits in East London looking at them, and they were having a conversation about, I suppose, what you'd call today balance of performance, because obviously all these cars were so different that in some way they had to make them equal, and they started sort of having a fight, a physical fight, just bumping each other and so on, because to them it was so important, well, that's right, but I mean, there's a whole lot. And I remember, I don't know if it was Tony or he started crying afterwards, that they'd been so aggressive with each other, So what I'm trying to say is, I met Michael Briggs 10 years after we stopped racing against each other, and I say met because I met him and I was like, this is such a nice guy. But I hated him when I was racing, because you end up being these let's call it type A personalities, or you got your team and you've got to beat him, and you've got all your people helping you, supporting you to beat him. So you can't really be friends, even though you are very similar. BMW and Opel, and I think that if you look back historically, the best racing series worldwide and definitely in South Africa, there's always been a rivalry between at least or only two manufacturers, Alfa Ford or BMW Opel. You don't need more than that. So the best eras have always been where there's been these cars and the drivers that come with them. So, Damso in the XR8 and Nicola, whatever, or Tony in the BM and so on. So definitely the rivalry was BMW Opel, and Michael was Opel's man and Tony was BMW's man for sure. And then later on, I sort of inherited that, I think, and so did Sean van Linde. In the touring car era,
Yes.
Touring cars felt terribly important because we were racing, sort of international cars, and we felt like we were at the top of that thing, and we were being paid, so I think there were obviously paid drivers before, but felt like we were works drivers or paid drivers and representing BMW or Opel or whatever. And so it was a very pressured environment, and we had race engineers and, the whole thing. So it sometimes, and I'm not sure I know exactly how Formula One drivers feel, but I understand the pressure of something can make you not react in a normal way or whatever, or feel the pressure, make things more difficult, So it was very big for us, and in fact, I think I think it was very difficult for me to adapt to normal life after touring cars. Very, very difficult. I remember, yeah, I know I would get a new helmet every year, new overalls, new clothes, the cars, everything was new all the time, and they would rattle off numbers of what, we've just got a new floor tray for you. Oh, these shocks have come, they're 100,000 around a corner. And just numbers, and just BMW throwing stuff at us. Yes, my dad was, he's still alive, he's 92, and he goes down to Killarney at any chance he gets. So he was, he's motor racing is life. So at one point he was the chairman of the Saloon Car Commission of MSA, and I think they just ended. So they ended. It was production cars. And it was Group A, and then he went around and saw all the motorsport manufactured. I remember we went up to see Mick Jones at Ford, and he sold them all on the idea of Group N, which was initially completely standard cars on road tires, standard brakes, and so on. They sort of morphed into production cars, and then it just disappeared again. But at the height of Group N, I think there were 35 Class E cars, more than 80 cars in the field. In every class, there was a manufacturer representation, and there was a tire war between Goodyear, Firestone, and Continental. So they were throwing tires at us. I know they weren't slick tires, but they were tires that we made into slicks by cutting them. So when he started Group N, the very first race, I think, was a 6-hour race at Killarney, and Sarel van der Merwe and Jochen Rindt, Jochen Mas won that race. And Sarel, because Sarel's an interesting guy. So I was looking at this, at that point he was racing Group C Porsche and racing in America or whatever, and he came back to drive a Golf 1 1800 with like 82 kilowatts, no roll cage and whatever, in 1984 or 84. And this thing, they were probably doing 1 minute 35s at Killarney, where he was racing a car that probably could have done 6s or 8s or something, and he found it very boring, so he started smoking in the car. He's wearing it, and there's actually now a rule that you're not allowed to smoke in a car while you're racing because of Sarel. so and when I said that Tony was driven, I think Sarel's the same. He's somebody that just couldn't stop driving, so he was willing to keep on going long after his career possibly was finished and drive anything and anything all the time. Like Sarel, unique that he raced from the 60s through to the 2000s and 20s or something, Yes. It's amazing. Anyway, so my dad started Group N, and then the thing with Group N was there was A, B, C, D, and E classes, and all the manufacturers were represented in those classes. So especially Delta Motorsport, which was Opel, they figured out that they could sell cars based on their racing successes, and they used motor racing as a marketing tool. And so did Sabat Batteries and all the other people, and obviously the tire manufacturers that I spoke about. Between the tire manufacturers, even inside BMW, Robbie Smith was running on Firestone and the works team was running on Goodyears. And we felt that the Firestones were better and caused a lot of political problems in the team, So that tire war things, it adds another level of complexity. So what actually then happened was BMW ended up running BMWs in Class A, whatever, and Delta were running E, D, C, B, and A, all of them cadets, from a 1300 through, and Volkswagen were running cars in C, B, and Toyota was also running cars. So if you were a young guy, and I'll tell you, you mentioned McCleary. Now, if you were McCleary, Roger didn't have piles of money, okay? You could buy a cadet, let's say a second-hand cadet, and it would be like buying, say, a Hyundai i10 now. Okay, so for 80 grand, and you could go race. And then if you're doing well, the factory would notice you and start helping you and maybe give you a Class D car or a Class C car and maybe a Class B car and maybe a Class A car, and then you happen to get into a touring car. That happened for Grant McCleary and Sean Watson-Smith and Janelle de Villiers. Okay, so Neil started in a Class D cadet, I think, and then ended up in a Nissan and in a touring car, and then off-road car, and then Volkswagen, and then Toyota. So, and a massive career based on Group N,
Sure.
because now, yeah. So because, and I know a lot of people that were actually racing for free, using the tires and things that they got and all the help that they got. I don't mean that they made piles of money, but they raced for free. In the
Yes.
beginning, when I was driving Group N car, I drove to the track in my Group N car that Toyota had given me, and we put 4 tires in the boot and a jack and a toolbox, and we drove to East London. So if you compare that cost, with towing a vehicle and a
Yes.
trailer and all that stuff, just that alone, and also it was possible to sort of worm your way in, because dealerships would help you with brakes, and the tires were free, and you could get a car, and you could talk your way into situations. So where there were a lot of what I call blue collar racing drivers in Group N at the time, people that would never have been able to race at that level without this. Compared to today, if you want your son to race a Polo Cup car, you've got to buy one. There's no other way. You can't get one some other way, because everybody's trying to buy one. And if you want tires, you've got to buy them. You can't get them because they come from a company that makes money just selling the tires, and they're only Dunlops, So we didn't have that thing where the tire company themselves were in a war with each other. And so they needed, so then what actually happened was the people driving the cars turned out to be the best, or at least people thought they were the best. So I think one of the things that made touring cars interesting was that you couldn't buy a seat in a touring car, Class A car. You couldn't. You could only get a seat. They didn't need your money. So maybe we weren't the best, but we were in the seats, So you couldn't buy a Class A touring car factory drive. You couldn't. So you could buy a car that was a bit slower maybe, but you couldn't get a factory seat with money, only with your success, sort of. And it was that small little era, and then it's gone. Somehow South Africa fumbled that, and it disappeared. No, he had a Chevron B8, and then he had a Chevron B16. He had darts. Obviously, he was sort of one of the darts works drivers. Still got a dart. So I've actually personally never driven a dart, but I grew up with all those stories. And Bob van Niekerk built this car. It was GSM Glass something Motorworks or something. And it was in its day very quick and very sort of forward thinking, and it was much quicker than similar sports cars in the era. And my dad had a special lightweight one, and him and Peter Goff won all the races or whatever. I think Willie Meisner died in a car crash in his late 30s, unfortunately. So that ended, I think, the thing, and they went out of business. Could have been something, I don't know.
Yes.
I think that's overseas. And then they came back here and carried on, something like that. There's a whole book about it and the history of it, and a very strong GSM Dart Club in Cape Town. I think they built about 100-something cars, And they also built a car called a Flamingo, which had a roof on it. It was Formula Fords, and then Volkswagen decided, they approached Owen. And also, I think DAW built cars based on they had to use Volkswagen parts and things. And Owen's car had Volkswagen uprights and that. And then and I think it was quite a good car, but it was quite heavy and so on. And the next year they were allowed to bring in Swifts, I think, from overseas, and that was the end of Owen's car. He just couldn't, So, but it was quite pretty. It looked like a Ferrari from the day. It was. I just come from the Formula 4 Championship, and the last couple of races there was the GTI as well, and they had wings and slicks, so it was very nice. They had a bit of aero. Mark de Nobrega had one, and I had one, and we were sort of developing this car, testing all the time and whatever. And then, unfortunately, we didn't do very well the next year with that car. And that year, 1990, I was driving 3 cars. I was driving the Formula GTI, the Westbank car, and the Group N car. So it was very nice. Yeah, it was very nice. Sometimes on the same day. It was very nice. You sort of when that sort of stuff happens to you, you just think, this is it. This is how it's going to go. This is how my life normally is.
Yes.
There was another time when I was driving. Remember the V8 stock cars that Peter Lindenberg and Jimmy Price started driving a SAS car and supercar and Opel, I think, in the same time. Not in the same days though. So that was also very nice. So we didn't speak about that Opel. So after the super touring car era, they started a sort of a homegrown South African series with Continental tires, 17-inch wheels, everybody with the same gearbox, but their own engines. And Opel came to that a little bit late. Mike Carroll built a car. And the first year it wasn't great. And the second year it was very good. And then before we could have a third year, they cancelled the whole series because it looked like Nissan wanted to pull out and whatever. And then we had 1 year with Opel Petronas with the Westbank cars, and then that all stopped, and Glenn went off to do off-road racing with Nissan. So that touring car series was also very nice, and working with Mike Carroll was also amazing. One of the top people I've ever worked with. In motorsport. So I wish somebody would make a collection of all the cars Owen actually built. The rally car that Serge Damso won the championship in is still at Toyota.
Okay.
And our Class B BMWs. He's had one called Supercars, which had a 4-cylinder Opel engine, is still going.
Yeah.
VS Masters, yes. So
yes.
that is a Mustang lookalike with a Windsor 351 V8 in it, also still going. He was hugely influential, especially in Cape Town, but I think countrywide, sort of a mad professor. That's right, the Calibra as well. I remember him building the Calibra. It was, I think, Nick's rebuilding that car, but I looked at it, I was like, oh, and this is dangerous. It was he made a honeycomb aluminium chassis bonded together with this tube running down the middle. And so the Calibra, as I remember, they decided to use a supercharged V6, which was a V8 engine with one cylinder cut off that they'd use in boats or something. And they had a transaxle gearbox, and its torque delivery was so massive that it was very difficult to drive. And Michael had a couple of good runs in it, but it's such a pity if they could have, because just after that, everybody adopted V8 engines from NASCAR or whatever, and the whole Westbank series went that way as well. I remember the first car that came here for Sarl with the V8 in. So if they'd had a V8 in that car instead of that V6, I remember the name of the guy that developed. Doesn't matter. That car could have been very successful, but I think the engine. And it made a massive amount of torque and had a very short power band, as I remember. And telling me that this thing and it breaking things and it was difficult to drive. So the other guy that I had is because Owen Eddie Pinto had a workshop right next to Owen. So that was also at the end of his career. But I was really privileged to see and meet Eddie Pinto. And he rebuilt that Brabham Formula One car with a Repco engine in, and and I drove that car very gingerly around the track, and met those guys. Also amazing. Oh, yeah, I mean, I was just a young poople, but you meet these people, and I mean, if you think what John Love did, and driving all over the country, all the way up to Bulawayo. I think he lived in Bulawayo, towing a Formula One car, whatever, and coming back here and winning all those championships. Amazing. One of the biggest achievements of my life was beating Basil Mann. Basil was like a Formula Ford, and I know he didn't put proper campaign the year I won the championship, but he, I had a couple of races with him, a proper driver.
Yes.
Racing with him, meeting him at Welcome, and it was a big thing for me.
Yes.
You have sort of milestones where you, remember the Formula Fords were on radial tires. I remember Bram was also racing, Bram Smith, and I decided I had to practice in the rain because I didn't know, so I got this car out and I practiced the Killarney in the rain. Disconnect the rear anti-roll bar, and then I was like, oh fuck, I am so bad at this. This is shocking. You can't see, and this was terrible. And then we had a rain race, and I did quite well. I don't know if I won or whatever, but And it's just like a monkey off your back. Oh, everybody's got the same problem. It's not just you, you know. It's like this for everybody in the rain. It's not just you. Yeah, I remember. So I remember Brahm, Matt Kaiser, and Basil. These were, to me they were godlike almost. You had to beat them. People spoke about Basil Mann, 6 times Formula 4 champion, whatever it was, brilliant, and his dad, and all this, so a little bit older, so they would have been, they would have already peaked, or be in the other side of their career, sort of when we came on. Chris is my age, Michael Briggs is my age. But also a very aggressive racer. We haven't spoken about Terry Moss, my other teammate, Sean van Linde and Sean Watson Smith. They were both strong teammates. Grant, he was definitely hard to beat. I mean, and mentally extremely tough. Sort of a rough and ready guy from Port Elizabeth. He was Chris Aberdeen's teammate at Audi. And, I really rate Chris, and Terry was often came out as the champion through a year, He was extremely good. Also a little bit older than us. So he didn't have that polish, if you like.
Yeah.
He also used to hang on to the roll cage with one hand and drive with the other hand. He's like, what? And Terry is, he speaks fluent Xhosa. So we did a thing once with the touring cars, and we went to a bunch of schools, and we pitched up at a school with all black kids, and Terry in Cape Town, and Terry started speaking Xhosa, and to me it sounded fluent. They all looked at, wow, this guy talking Xhosa to them. Yeah, actually Bozel, yes, and then I think he might have had a Swift after that. I can't remember exactly, but because of his ties with Volkswagen, he would have been in the Formula GTI,
Yes.
They would have wanted him in there. Yeah. No, we had a lot of name drivers in that series for the year or two. Sean van Linde also came into that and crashed me into the wall at Kyalami. I don't remember, story. You remember, we're all very used to this timing system that we've got now, where the times are taken with the beams or whatever, and it's absolute down to the thousandth of a second. Timekeeping before those things were done was a stopwatch, and they were often done in the control tower, like at Killarney. They had a spotter, would call out a name, and then the people that were doing the timekeeping were volunteers, like people's girlfriends and wives or whatever. They would do the timekeeping, and the teams themselves would also do timekeeping of their own. So the Opel team would time all the Opels and all the BMs, and the BMs would time all the Opels and all the BMs. So that everybody had a good idea of what everybody did for qualifying. And then they would go to the timekeepers and have a meeting with the timekeepers and compare what we've got and what the timekeepers have got. Okay. So then it becomes a situation where we go, okay, the timekeepers have got Briggs on pole, but BMW is convinced that Tony's on pole, and Opel is saying now Briggs is on pole, and so they would have a sort of a discussion, and then they would go, okay, you can have Briggs on pole, then Tony's second, but because you took Briggs on pole, Deon's going to be third, and then it's going to be Roddy Turner or whatever, and Peter Lance, who I think doesn't get enough credit for being a bloody brilliant racing driver and car preparer or whatever, but he was a lone guy with the BMW, and he'd often be on pole, but he would be shuffled to 6 or something in this conversation, protesting, no, actually, I'm on pole, I got it, And then obviously when the beam timing came along, it was over, because the timekeeper was very sure. But before that, the timekeeper wasn't sure, so they would have this sort of meeting to do the times. And I remember that those sort of, horse trading, between the teams to make the grid.
The technology in them was mind-blowing in your touring cars.
This pendulum thing that they tried with us, because the cars had a problem locking the inner front wheel, and making flat spots because we had massive camber and we didn't have ABS. So they had this pendulum thing that they tried, which I didn't think worked very well. I saw pictures of it the other day again. I was like, oh, yeah, I remember that thing. Yeah. It was great. But, the thing with the our touring cars, and it's a thing that kind of happened to the sport. I drove a German touring car, M3, the E30 M3 at Kyalami in 1990.
Yes.
And it was fantastic. That car had a little bit more power and revved quite a lot more. So when you went into sunset, and it would go sideways when you put power down. So our South African touring cars, they didn't do that. So they improved the suspension, but they also dumbed the engine down because revs cost money. So
Yes.
our cars were based on the British touring car series, and what they did was they stopped the engines from revving, so it went to 8,500 instead of 10 something, I don't know. So they made less power, and they also, the engine had the characteristic where it would rev happily and then suddenly hit the rev limiter so you didn't have the feeling of, oh, I've got to change gear. You had to remind yourself because it was still in the power band. So
Sure.
in that regard, it was a little bit of a disappointment. So that DTM car, that E30 DTM car was magnificent. It was, I think it was a far better car, but it was a DTM car. So they had more money to spend in Germany. At Array, I had a lot of help from Alan Langridge and Dave Sinclair, and I traveled all over the country. I kind of prepared myself. Owen helped, and also I had a Johan Coetzee engine, which was very or Johan Coetzee cylinder head anyway. It's very good. A couple of years later, I had quite a run-in with Johan in the West Banks because we had our West Bank car at debut at East London did a 5. It did debut at Killarney, but the first serious race we did was I remember doing 5s at Port Elizabeth, and they had to put a lot of weight in. But Johan could see it bump me all the way around. So they had a thing where, they had a rolling start. So during the rolling start, you try and intimidate the other guys and drive in their place so they can't take their place up and all this kind of thing. So that's what Johan, Tony, and all of them. The rolling starts are quite something. So I thought, okay, that's what it's like. So then I took him off the next race at Swartkops because he tried to go around the outside, and I had him off, and we had a hearing going on for months, years. He was cross with me. But I want to tell you something else about the West Bank. So I was in a Class B car. I think the thing could do 17s at kilometers. It wasn't slow at all. And we would have this rolling start, and normally I was on pole or second Class B, which made me 6th or 7th on the grid with all the Class A cars, the Audis and Willie's car and stuff. And I remember like you'd feel really funny from breathing all the fumes because fuel was fucking open. There was no rules for that. So now the rolling start, what you do is you sort of you're supposed to get together, and then the pole man's supposed to control the start. But now these Class A cars are all watching each other, and I'm sitting in Class B 6 down, and I've got all my Class B oaks trying to over. So at some point, the Class A guys are going gug and slowing down and going, and then at some point I decide, okay, I'm going now, so I'll go. But they haven't gone yet. So just before you can lift or you think, fuck it, they accelerate and they just disappear because they had so much more power than us. Those Class A cars, Chris Aberdeen did in 1992 a 10-1 at Killarney with his Audi. I think they did 9 sometimes, but I can tell you how fast that is. For that time, those four-wheel drive Audis, and then the other things were obviously keeping up with them. The Mazda, the Penn built, and Willie's car, and Sarles, Ford, they were incredibly fast. So the thing with the West Banks that was interesting was the disparity between the classes. My Class B car today would still be quite a quick car, but it was overtaken by these things, like it was standing still. Never mind the Class D Golfs, which are 13 or 1400s, So It was quite, so the West Bank modified race was quite something. Plus, you're a younger guy, and then you've got all these real rough old guys. They do anything, yeah,
Yeah.
including fist fights and bit things and whatever they want. Yeah. No, it was. Hey, mostly the youngsters are racing each other.
Yes.
They. If you're 18, you're racing mostly 18s. You don't come as 18 into a class where there's a 40-year-old.
No.
Not on that level. I mean, you do obviously in historics and whatever, but not on that level where everybody's an animal sort of. Especially when BMW entered Class B, it wasn't popular. I mean, I alluded to that sort of feeling that, like it was. So Paul Weavers came to me and said, "Oh, there's a DTM race. Reinhold Schultz had put it together, and you're going to drive a BMW together, and you're going to drive a BMW in Winfield colors." And I was like, "Oh," and then I went, might not happen, whatever. And then they arrived here, and there were 3 Schnitzer cars and 2 Linde cars. And Tony decided that he wanted to drive a Schnitzer car, which I would have as well, because nobody knew about the Linde team. But it turned out that the second Linde car was better than the third Schnitzer car. So Tony had a dog of a car, and I'd got a good car. The Mercs were quite quick. Klaus Ludwig was here. He won the race. That's the first time I saw an in-car video of a driver in a saloon car, Klaus Ludwig, and he was fast asleep. He was sitting there like this. I was still driving like this. I thought driving was, you got to, be busy, And Sorrel did extremely well. Chris Aberdeen also drove a Mercedes. I remember Sorrel's car blowing up. So, I ended up fifth twice, and I got Springbok colors for that. And then I went over to a motor show in Bologna. There was Linda invited me, and there was a show race, one of those races where you have one car going out of a thing and another car coming in, but it was in DTM cars, like those Race of Champions, that kind of thing. Bloody brilliant. I didn't quite realize what an opportunity that was for me to go there. And I don't know why, I just came back. I was almost in a DTM car, but I was like, and then I came back and didn't speak to Linda again, and just carried on and raced touring cars or whatever. And I think to myself, nobody said to me, well, why don't you just stay there, drive a DTM car, and I didn't. I thought I was doing great staying in South Africa. I suppose that was our world, so it was. So all of us, if we could choose something to be, and you could be an actor, or you could be this. I don't think there's anything better than being a professional racing driver, to be honest. It's what I would want to be, and if I could have and I was that for a bit, so that's fantastic. Yeah.